All right, friends, it's my pleasure to announce our speaker today. This is a good friend and co-founder of Awakening Ways, religious science minister. We had his wife Terry speak here, I don't know, a month or so ago, and enjoyed that so well. And I know some of you are familiar with them because of connection they had many years ago with our community. Anyway, here is Reverend Frank ZumMallen. Frank, great to have you here. Go ahead. Frank, unmute yourself.
Muted. I thought LaDawn was going to do that. I apologize.
That's what.
There. How's that?
Yes, good.
Okay. It's wonderful to be here with you this morning. Yeah, this idea of mystery that you've been talking about all month. You know, when Terry and I were exploring, when we were first in our relationship many years ago, we were married for 38 years and we knew one another for a couple of years before that. We were exploring our spirituality together, trying to get a handle on where each of us was. And Terry shared with me that she, in her childhood, Catholic childhood, had been told by the nuns on several occasions when she asked impertinent questions, at least what they thought were impertinent questions, that it's one of God's mysteries. One of God's mysteries. And I shared with her that in my Missouri Lutheran upbringing, German Lutheran upbringing, I was told that same thing by our minister. Usually when I was asking a question that challenged his dogma, and always when he was drinking schnapps and beer with my grandfather. And so I have spent a great deal of time in my life trying to determine what are these sacred mysteries? What are they to us in New Thought? You know, we pride ourselves in New Thought that we don't have dogma, that instead we look at the universe as it really is and try to find our oneness with the universe, with God, through many different practices. And as somebody said, as Brian was talking about earlier, his ministerial classes, that they talked about it was much harder to live a sermon than to preach one. And I think that's true for all of us. And I had to ask myself after, gosh, I've been meditating since 1974. I don't know how many years that is. I don't want to count. But I still have those times when I have difficulty getting into my meditation because that monkey mind is just going crazy. And I started looking at what is this monkey mind and why do we have it? What is that ego mind that we have and what is that mind that's behind it that we're trying to reach? How do we do that and what is it? Jan and Terry have heard me speak about parts of this many times over the years because I think it's the most important issue that's before us as New Thought people, as truth seekers and truth students. I came to realize that the Garden of Eden story with Adam and Eve being sent out of the garden didn't apply to the first moment in time when man came to self-consciousness and free will, but that it came to each and every one of us, that we all are struggling with that idea of free will versus our connection to God. And I had to ask myself over and over again why that was true. And the answer that I finally came to was a very scientific one. It's the nature of our brains. Inside our skull, there are two brains. And the left and the right hemispheres are not the same, and they're not often in agreement with one another. You know, the left brain is responsible for what we would call our ego mind, our consciousness of the world around us. And our subconscious, our right brain is our subconscious brain. It's that repository of everything that's ever happened. But beyond that, it is the computer, the filter system that filters out all of the sensory input that we don't need in the moment, and it focuses us on the sensory input that we do need. Consequently, brain science tells us that the conscious mind processes between 16 and 40 bits of information per second, which is all sensory. And the subconscious mind processes about 16 million bits of information per second. And the reason for that is that it takes all that information that's constantly being bombarding us visually, auditorially, kinesthetically, all of our senses are constantly bombarding our brain with information. And the subconscious mind has to filter all of that and decide what's important in the moment. And our experiences are the filters, our life experiences and our thoughts are the filters that the subconscious mind uses to filter everything out. And I asked myself, is that what we're talking about when the Adam and Eve story tells us that they were thrown out of the garden because they came to self-consciousness, they came to self-awareness, and they began doing that work of filtering? Or was there something else? And then I came across Jesus talking about the prodigal son, and I realized that he was talking about exactly the same experience that the Garden of Eden story was. So I had to ask myself, are we talking about the evolution from Neanderthal to Cro-Magnon? Is that when we became, when we gained our free will, or was it some other time? And surprisingly enough, there was a study done at Princeton University back in the 1970s by a man named Julian Jaynes. He was a mind researcher, a consciousness researcher, and an anthropologist at Princeton. And he spoke to the real sacred mystery that we're talking about. What he said was that there was a time about 3,000 years ago, up until that time, when humans were literally split-brained. We had a conscious mind and we had a subconscious mind, and the subconscious mind and the conscious mind didn't talk to one another the way they do in us when we're unaware of it. We were aware of that conversation going on, and the conscious mind, not knowing what it was, interpreted the subconscious as the God mind. And indeed, I believe that God speaks to us through our subconscious, and so they were right. He said that his research showed that up until that time, the writings of the religions were always talking about the gods that were speaking to them. And when we read the Bible, the whole Old Testament has stories of prophets who were being spoken to directly by God. The story of Moses and the burning bush is a perfect example. James said that when these things happened, that there were all kinds of auditory and sensory, other sensory hallucinations that went with it, like bright lights. You know, and that was that was what happened with the burning bush, that Moses was seeing this light surrounding this bush that he was speaking to. And that the conscious mind did not exist at this time. Only the absolute mind was communicating with humanity. Nobody knows what brought this about, but you'll find readings, for example, oh, I missed a page here in my notes. There's what I wanted. There's evidence in all that the original civilizations were theocracies where God ran it. There are writings between 3,000 and 4,000 years ago that show that something happened first in the Middle East and then spreading throughout the world. And so you have Babylonian tablets from that period of time that say, act promptly, make your God happy. And then in a split second, the tablets began saying, my God has forsaken me and disappeared. My goddess has failed me and keeps at a distance. The good angel who walked beside me has departed. And of course, there was David in the Psalms saying things like, how long, Yahweh, how long will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? There are literally thousands of references like this at about this period of time that say that suddenly something happened and we no longer heard the voice of God in our head. During this transitional time, most people lost the ability to hear the voice, and only a few people that were referred to as oracles, as prophets, as others, continued to hear the voice of God. What brought about this sudden change? We don't know for sure. But what we do know is that from the physical evidence, it was not biological. There was not a biological change. It was a cultural change. Something happened in society that was so overwhelming that the old way of thinking no longer worked. And the new way of thinking, a new way of thinking had to be adopted. It was a literal representation of the quote attributed to Einstein, you cannot solve the problem in the same consciousness that created it. And it was during this time that all the great codes of laws were written. The Ten Commandments were written at this time. The Code of Hammurabi, the Code of Namu, which was Sumerian, and it was the original one at about 2100 BCE. So this pattern suddenly shifted from a pattern of speaking directly to God to having to be told what God was saying by someone else. And it's during this period of time that the very first mention of prayer in history comes about. It's during this time that we begin hearing people like reading things like the Rig Veda, like the Upanishads, like Zoroastrianism, Judaism, the Greek mysteries, Egyptian and Greek mystery schools, all came about within about 1,000-year period of one another to try to address this sudden disappearance in their minds of God. Even though God was still there, still speaking to them, they could no longer hear it. Meditation began at about this time so that people could quiet that conscious mind, that monkey mind, enough to be able to hear the voice of God. And that brings us to where we are now. Right now in our world, there are so many problems that overwhelm us politically, economically, especially ecologically, that we cannot address them using the kind of thinking we're doing now. I suggest that this is another cosmic 2x4 to force us into a new way of thinking that we as New Thought, that we as truth seekers, whether we're in New Thought or we're in Hinduism or Buddhism or something else, where we address the problem by going to God directly, not through dogma, but through consciousness. We are the ones who are most suited to go through a change where The conscious and the subconscious have merged into a new way of being, a consciousness where God mind within us and the conscious mind within us are merged into a perfect consciousness of awareness and oneness. And isn't that what the Christ consciousness is? A place of complete merging of the God mind and the human mind. Imagine a consciousness in which any form of prayer or treatment is unnecessary because God is already present. Imagine meditation no longer becoming necessary because we were in the God mind at every moment in time, and yet as conscious as we are this moment. It's a new paradigm, a new shift, a new way of literally a new consciousness. You know, there are 5 different major definitions of consciousness in the world, and none of them work. None of them work because we don't know what it is that we're dealing with. Imagine living in the consciousness of spirit in every moment, hearing that whisper constantly at the same time that you're living fully as a consciousness. Imagine that you are able to access the power of that greater mind, that cosmic mind that we call God, and that we are able to bring that consciousness to dealing with our problems. When and how will it happen? I don't know. That's the real sacred mystery. That's the real God mystery that's yet to be addressed. But it will happen. It'll happen as all demonstrations do when the mind of man accepts it as the truth. Is there a rush? When the need is critical enough, I suggest that it's going to happen automatically and that you and I may be alive to experience that change. There are so many of us in New Thought, in Hinduism, in Buddhism, in Sufism, even in Christianity, although we don't see it. The Catholic centering prayer movement is a perfect example of meditation. It's a wonderful example of meditation. But we're the ones that'll bring it about, even though there's not a majority of us in the world. Ernest Holmes, the founder of my lineage, said, "One alone in consciousness with the infinite is a complete majority in the universe." And in the meantime, it's our place to be ready, to be awake to our place in a new quantum leap that's going to be happening. The active agents of oneness in the world, right here and right now. Knowing that it will always unfold in perfect order, knowing and sharing that message, that it is coming, it is happening, and simply enjoy the anticipation that the demonstration already is and always has been. And that may be the best consciousness of all. Namaste.